welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I'm your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, Jackson Keller.
And you know what? We're doing it. It's been a long requested episode by a number of people. We've done 2 of them already. Y'all know what it's time for. It's another JoJo.
Going back
it's another
to the JoJo well, slurping that water, slurping Geb's, the stand Geb from Endul's water. We're going to drink it all up. It's JoJo time.
Clearly one of us knows much more about what they're talking about than the other. If you have not listened to our previous episodes, A, go listen to them, they're great. But B, quick rundown on what we know about JoJo. I watched the part 1 first and recommended it to Jackson a long time ago, who proceeded to not watch it for like 2 years and then eventually watched it and fell in love with it. Whereas then he took over and watched the rest of it, whereas then I decided not to watch anything beyond the first one because the second arc seemed dumb until we did the podcast. Whereas I watched the second arc and really liked the second arc a lot too. We'll get to the third arc.
Yeah, we're talking about Stardust Crusaders today, and I've got... Honestly, I think the meta of Stardust Crusaders is a lot more interesting to talk about than Stardust Crusaders itself, but I do have a few things to say about the content. As Sean mentioned, I am basically indeed our resident JoJo expert. The only part that I have not really had much exposure to is part 8, just because that is currently ongoing, and it seems like, from what I've heard, that it might be getting close to ending, so I figure I'll just wait and, binge it all at once it's done. But I have, other than that, I am caught up in the manga. I'm not quite caught up in the Part 5 adaptation. Big JoJo fan, got a lot of opinions, got a lot of thoughts. And so, Part 3... Part 3 is interesting.
That's a way of putting it.
Yes. I'd say it's a problematic fave of mine, because there are a lot of things that I like about Part 3. There are a lot of things that I don't like about Part 3, both in form and content. Overall, I'd say, if I'm gonna rank the parts of JoJo, it's probably exactly in the middle. I think overall I like it more just a smidge than part 1, but it isn't anywhere near as good as part 7 or part 2. The bag is mixed. It is peak JoJo. It will come to define the rest of the series. It may as well basically be a completely different series. And my theory that I have is that part 3 is the real test for whether or not you're going to watch the rest of JoJo. If you make it all the way through part 3, I think you're doomed. I think you're gonna get through the rest of it. But if you give up earlier in the part, you don't like how sudden the shift is, and it is a very sudden shift in a lot of ways, then JoJo's just not the thing for you, even though part 2 tricked you into thinking maybe it was, because it was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still shocked that you ranked part 1 so low, just because I think part 1 does a really good job of introducing us to our main antagonist. It is punchy and quick. And it is only 8 episodes, which I cannot herald as a good thing enough.
Part 1, just to give you kind of my rationale on this, what I like about part 1, I really, really like. It's kind of the same situation. It's a little more extreme than my feelings on part 3, because part 3 I was generally more mellow with, and we'll talk about maybe why that is. But what I liked about part 1, I really, really, really like, and what I don't like about part 1, I really, really, really don't. It's a lot more of a polarizing experience for me.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think at least... So, here, I guess I'm going to get into a little bit of spoilers on my opinion of part 3. Not actual spoilers yet, don't worry. But my current ranking, I think, would probably be 2 being the best, 1 being the middle, and 3 being the bottom. Just because let's talk about how I felt about JoJo Part 3, because I did not particularly care for this arc. We did a quick run through before we started recording of episode by episode basis on what I thought of it, and it really kind of helped me solidify that for the most part, I was just kind of bored to considering it bad. There were a couple points in it that I liked. I don't even want to say each episode, but every second or third episode, I'm like, oh, okay, I like this moment in it, even though the rest of the episode might not be as interesting. I found most of the fights to be really boring and just kind of confusing in how everything just wraps up. I mean, JoJo's kind of notorious for just pulling things out of its ass, but it didn't even feel like ass pulls as much as just, hey, they win because reasons, don't worry about it. And that's the end of the fight, so we're going to move on and you can go fight a living car next. Have fun. And I go, okay, sure, why not? So I was just really kind of let down by the episode to episode run through. There was one fight that I thought was really interesting, but for the most part, I thought they were all kind of boring and rather... they're not uninspired because, as I said, there is some moments, like the ideas behind the fights tend to start off really interesting. They just kind of end in a very type of way. Like, they're just done. There's nothing, no, I have trumped your powers using this, and this. It's just kind of like, all right, you win. We're moving on. Don't worry about it. We're good. And I think that's really underwhelming and boring for me.
So here's the central problem with all of JoJo from here on out, basically, except for again, maybe it gets better in part 7. I'd have to reread it, but I think part 7 even has this problem and just makes up for it in being a better story. But so the appeal of JoJo now is not in the plot or the characters. The idea is that, you know what, I'm going to back up, because I think it's impossible to talk about this absolutely bonkers shift that we're seeing. Completely new powers, completely new lore, completely new style, completely new format. So why would Hirohiko Araki make this change? Why would he do something like this? And I think it's helpful to know that for part 1 and 2, when they were first being serialized and shown in Jump, they weren't exactly popular. They ranked pretty low consistently in terms of like readership interest. When the people who did read it mostly kind of like waved it off as a Fist of the North Star ripoff. And just overall, for some criticisms that were justified, for others just because, say what you will about JoJo, it definitely goes against the grain of a lot of conventional anime and manga logic. Like, one of the reasons that part 2 and part 1 didn't really get noticed is that the protagonists aren't Japanese, and so that, especially back in the 80s, apparently that was a big thing, that characters who weren't Japanese were seen as just like completely unrelatable. The decision to I mean, we're talking about part 3, so I guess spoilers for part 1. The decision to kill off Jonathan was really bold for the time. So it's just kind of a mix of just like not being kind of a fledgling series and also one that sort of went against the grain. And the thing about part 3 is that originally, apparently, JoJo was just meant to be a trilogy, and the initial idea was a lot more in line with what we saw from part 1 and 2, a lot more about the vampires, a lot more about the Ripple.
I'll say this does feel very much like the end of a trilogy at this point.
Yeah, you know, and it definitely is. Like, you know, we the return of Dio, we have both like Jotaro and Joseph kind of like specifically trying to like end kind of the curse that started with Jonathan. Like, it feels very conclusive, and I think it's pretty telling that like these sort of like family lineage aspects don't really come back until like part 6, which might be a reason I'm not such a big fan of part 4 and 5, because that's one of the meta narrative is one of the things that I like about this series. But it would have been even more of a focus, and it would have been more of a definitive ending. But I guess just because, for one reason or another, just because it wasn't popular, because Araki was running out of ideas to do new things with the Ripple, you know, who can say? Who can say why he chose to go this way? But I think that the decision makes a lot more sense when you take the sort of production cycle of your average shonen manga into account, because, you know, we here in the States, we here in the West have a bit of a skewed view of like what the primary engagement with this sort of media is in its home country, because here, if you're like an anime fan, or even if you're not, like the anime is going to be your primary exposure to the sort of Japanese media. Like, even if you're not like someone who would consider themselves like an anime fan, there's probably like one or two that you've seen that you like from, you know, maybe Toonami or Netflix. Not to say that's the case for everyone, of course. Anime is still niche, but it's definitely more mainstream than manga is. Like, the only people who read manga like are the diehards, or the people who are like a diehard fan of a particular series, like the kids who were really into like Yu-Gi-Oh! And then like sought out the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga. And full disclosure, I didn't have quite the time to go back through the anime, so I read the manga for the first time for part 3. And it was definitely, I think it's safe to say it was a different experience. So there's already this shift of like this being the primary medium, because in Japan, from what I understand, the primary medium is manga. Like, anime, aside from like kid shows, basically is treated much like it is over here, as this like weird thing for nerds and undesirables. Whereas manga,
a dumb game for nerds and babies.
Yeah, precisely. Whereas manga, apparently, like, everyone reads manga. Like, you're on the train, use a lot of public transportation. Like, nobody really drives in Japan for the most part. So you have some time between stops to, like, read a chapter in a magazine. So I think with Stardust Crusaders, it makes a lot more sense if you view it less like this continuation of an epic saga and more like a newspaper comic. Like, it's got more in common with, like, Charlie Brown than it does, like, you know, Game of Thrones or whatever sort of like big, lengthy, like film serial drama that we might watch on TV.
When you said initially when we were talking about this, when you described it as a newspaper comic, are you familiar with like the Spider-Man comic that shows up in the newspaper, or like even Mary Worth?
Yeah.
Because like that's what I got out of it, much more than like Charlie Brown. Like, it felt very much, well, when you said that, I'm like, oh my god, it is basically just the newspaper Spider-Man comic. Somebody shows up, they punch for a couple minutes, and then it's over, and that's all it is. You move on to the next fight next week, and there's a little bit of like a through line from point to point, but for the most part, it's just that. It is the quintessential monster of the week.
Yeah, and so, like, you know, Charlie Brown maybe isn't the greatest example. Like, Spider-Man is much more relevant, but even
Mary Worth is the most relevant. Like, let's be honest here. Come on.
But even looking at like the Silver Age of comics, you know, before the market sort of shifted and, you know, like mainstream American comics took their stories more seriously. Like, you know, there's a reason that like you look at stuff like all those compilations of like Silver Age Superman comics and it's all just like dumb bullshit, because it's basically the same thing. It's people on a deadline trying to come up with like wacky things to entertain kids. And so it's just jarring, because what we're really seeing in the case of JoJo is a shift that I think is ultimately smart in terms of like the author's ability to keep making these stories, to keep like putting out new chapters every week, and for people to just like catch a glimpse of some like wacky meme shit while they're on their morning commute on the subway. But it just ends up being really weird in this context, because JoJo is one of the only series that I can think of that started being a lot more tightly plotted and having this sort of grand narrative before shifting into the meme stuff instead of the reverse. Like, there are a couple manga and anime, like I haven't watched like Yu Yu Hakusho or Bleach, but I've heard they're like this, and that the beginnings are very much like Monster of the Week, kind of like JoJo, but eventually the author decides he's going to take a crack at writing like a longer arc or a more serious story.
Yeah, actually, I have experience with both of those, and you're 100% right.
Yeah, so JoJo's one of the only ones I can think of where it was the opposite, where he started with this really plotted thing, and then was basically like, I'm going to give you memes every week. And so, for me, and I knew all this about part 3 going in, because I wasn't excited for it, especially after loving part 2 so much. So my expectations were pretty low, because part 3, despite being kind of the famous part in its home country, is one of the less popular parts here for pretty much every reason that Sean has described and will describe. But
oh yeah, my time is coming. Don't worry.
But for me, because I was aware of what I was getting into, and that I wasn't trying to catch up on it for a podcast, as far as the show goes, I'd just, like, watch an episode or a fight, like, over breakfast and, like, giggle at the memes and then go about the rest of my day. It was a lot more... It was a lot easier to enjoy it for what it is. And I do think it has some merits, once you get past all the stuff that's, like, really bad about it. And there is stuff that is really bad about it.
Really bad.
And I think the final fight with Dio is hype as fuck. It's exactly what I wanted out of that sort of confrontation. Yeah, I don't know. For me, part 3 is kind of a mixed bag. I enjoyed it more than I thought it would, and I think it works a lot better as a manga than it does as an anime. Like, I got through the whole thing in a couple hours to catch up, instead of, like, the episodes that would drag on and on and on in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you that it's a mixed bag, but as I said, I think my inclination is to more be a mixed bag of, hey, there's some really good ideas in here, too bad the execution just kind of sucks. Like, it's uninteresting, it's, at some points, just, as I said, it just kind of ends at some points it just, there's nothing happening, they just punch face until one of us passes out type of thing. And I'm just underwhelmed by that after the cleverness that was part 2, and, like, the wonderful villainy that was part 1. So
why don't we, since the devil's kind of in the details here, why don't we call this spoiler so we can maybe bring up specific examples, since I'm kind of done talking about, like, the meta production side of things.
Cool. Let me open this up then with, like, the most damning thing I can think of about how to explain why I didn't like this series so much, and the part that really threw me for a loop. And if you watch this show, I'm sure you're already assuming what I'm about to talk about, because that's right, we're going to talk about strength.
Side note, part of what I said about my theory about, like, making it through part 3 versus not making it through part 3, this is usually the turning point. Like, I was making Haley watch it, and she enjoyed part 1 and 2 quite a bit for what they were. And then we got to strength, and she was like, nope, I'm tapping out. Like, I cannot with this.
It's miserable. Strength is fucking one of the worst things I've ever seen. And not because, like, it is super problematic. But it's by far, like, one of the lower ends on the problematic scale of JoJo. JoJo's not great all the time.
Really? You think this is one of the lower ends? I think that, like, pretty much anything in part 3 is, like, several magnitudes worse than even the worst stuff from part 2.
I mean, arguably, they did end up cooperating with literal Nazis at the end of part 2, which I think is kind of my barometer.
I guess that's fair. Yeah, I suppose that's true. I got nothing to say to that.
I'm just going to explain this, because if you are listening to this is, like, episode 8, I think. And we're not going to get into this part, but, like, you should know that there is, like, weird sexual assault overtones at this point. There haven't really been present in part 3 up to this point. It happens. We're not going to talk about them, so I'm not going to throw out a true trigger warning on this one, just because I'm going to gloss over that part. But, like, I totally understand why people are like, fuck this show, because I'm like, fuck this show. But so the first 7 episodes are all about setting up these new powers and what stands are and how they function and everything how they work together. And the author, whose name I'm blanking on, go ahead.
Hirohiko Araki.
Is notorious for pulling things out of his ass as things happen. And I'm used to that in JoJo at this point. I'm expecting it. So, like, when early on Kakyoin, like, slices JoJo's legs with a paintbrush, and then that just never comes back again. I'm like, all right, whatever. Who fucking cares? It's JoJo. We move on. But then when we get to this, basically every rule that has been established up to this point is just thrown out the fucking window. We get this monkey who is sexual assaulty. And he's on a ship, but the ship is the stand, and the stand is the most boring power in the world. There's nothing interesting with it. It's all, this is like the epitome of why this series is garbage for me. Because, as I said, the stand breaks literally every rule that we have established, and that's going to be a pattern that goes forward. Is what rules you thought there were aren't actually there. Don't worry about it. Just move on. The ship just kind of loses eventually. I don't even remember what happens, but I'm sure it boils down to JoJo punched him hard, and the ship vanished, and they left the monkey to drown somewhere. And it's also insanely creepy and not great. So, like, this episode is your true test of how much you're going to get through the rest of it, because it is everything that is bad about JoJo in just a neat little bow. And if you make it through this, don't worry, the next scene is hyper problematic in episode 9, because they go to India and just make all sorts of weird racist remarks and things. This series is insane at that point.
More so than remarks, it was the presentation of India that was like truly one of the most like racist caricatures of a country that I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's absurd.
So here's the thing about Strength. You're right in that it's a microcosm of everything that is wrong about JoJo and will continue to be wrong about JoJo for quite some time. Goody. So here's the problem with stands. Stands are a cool idea. They got neat designs. They have neat powers. They're a good tool for a guy who needs to come up with something neat and entertaining and actiony every week. And, you know, the approach to fights being more like about like mystery and figuring out what your enemy's ability is and like puzzle solving is indeed in theory a cool idea, and sometimes it works better than others. But as you say, the main problem is that the solutions are either so obtuse and crazy that they don't feel satisfying when they're revealed, or Archie just writes himself into a corner and has to have the protagonist do something that is complete nonsense. Star Platinum...
and he even references that at one point, too. At the end with Polnareff fighting the Void guy, and he's like, what is going to happen? Option 1, I solve the problem. Option 2, my friends come rescue me. Option 3, I die. And I'm like, okay, you're being clever here, but also just fuck you.
Yeah, and so Star Platinum gets accused of being the worst of this. But frankly, like, aside from like maybe Part 4's protagonist, maybe Josuke, like, I don't think this gets any better. Star Platinum's just the most blatant about it. Is that like, so the previous episode, I think, is actually a better indicator for like why the execution.
Yes.
Yeah, and honestly, like with the previous episode, for me, the Dark Blue Moon Sea Ship episode was where I basically just like, all right, this is just...
Please note, they're on a ship. It is not the ghost ship of the next episode.
Yes.
They're just still on a ship. We should clarify that, because they're just fucking on things all the time.
They fight like a fish stand who can do things in water. Fine.
He's just the Shape of Water guy.
Yeah, it's the Shape of Water guy. And, you know, and so far, like, the water guy's powers all track for a dude who has, like, a fish stand. And you think that, like, it's kind of cool, because, like, even though there's a decent thing set up at the beginning, between, like, Jotaro and Kakyoin's first fight, in that Kakyoin's got more powers and can, like, be a little more versatile, but Jotaro is, like, stronger, but that doesn't help him so much if he can't hit him. So that's kind of an interesting idea going forward, is that Kakyoin
just becomes a cardboard stand-in to sit in the back.
Yeah.
So, really quick, before you keep going, I have to mention this. At one point later on in the series, Kakyoin ends up in the hospital, and, like, he's in the hospital for a good 5 episodes, and about midway through episode 3, one of them goes, Kakyoin's still in the hospital, and I go, oh yeah, I forgot that he was in this show. And just kept going.
The side characters are, they leave much to be desired in this one.
And they're all side characters.
Particularly Kakyoin. But no.
I do want to come back to the characters, actually. So
I want to come back to the characters too, but I think this is important.
Oh, absolutely.
So in that first episode that first fight between Jotaro and Kakarine is kind of where we get the rules, and like we sort of get the episode illustrates the difference between them. And I think it works out pretty well as sort of our baseline. And then the Sea Ship episode starts to go in the direction that you sort of think it is. Like, okay, like he's got the advantage in the water. Star Platinum's kind of basic. Like, oh no, what do I do? That's a good setup for like, I need to outsmart my opponent so I can get the
Joseph.
Yeah, precisely. You even have the old man with you, who's still the best character. But instead of having a clever solution, Jotaro just shouts, Starfinger! And his fingers get really long, and he stabs the dude with his fingers, and his head explodes. And that's that.
And then he becomes officially fucking Piccolo from Dragon Ball Z Abridged, where he sometimes goes, oh yeah, I forgot I can do that too.
He only does it like one other time. And this is the point where like... This is the point where you're like, okay, Star Platinum can do just literally whatever he wants, and that is going to be the case for just about every stand in the series. So because he doesn't stick to the rules...
Weirdly, though, Star Platinum doesn't do whatever he wants until the last moment. Like, up to that point, he gets the Star Fingers, then after that, he's basically just punch face guy.
I mean, with the fog, he does like the suck.
I forgot about the suck.
There are definitely some other moments where Star Platinum can just do a thing apropos of nothing. And so, yeah, and then so with Strength, like, we're only like 3 fights in, and we get to this next episode, and suddenly one of the fundamental rules of stands that, you know, normal people can't see them is just thrown out the window. And with that... It's and we never really get that sort of, like, codification of, like, the rules of stands ever again. So it's basically just a big meme at that point. There's no point in trying to figure it out. You may as well just let the nonsense happen to you. Which for me was kind of fun in short bursts. I like the people shouting in English. I like some of the wacky shit that happens. I did indeed laugh. When it wasn't being like racist or sexist. Yeah, but at that point, Starfinger is the turning point where like either you know you're in for the meme and you accept that and you're along for the ride, or you just say, nah, I'm done with this. This is too dumb. This is too stupid. And then you walk away like a normal human being.
If we weren't doing this for the podcast, I would have walked away at episode 8. I'm not going to lie to you. The strength would have killed me. I wouldn't have been able to keep going. I will say, though, too, just kind of an explanation to how I watched this, because Jackson did mention that, like, in short bursts, it might be better. I watched the entirety of Stardust Crusaders Part 1 over 2 days, and then I watched Stardust Crusaders Battle for Egypt over 2 days, with, like, a week in between them. So, like, it was super hard binging for me, and it was... not a good way of doing it. Don't do that.
JoJo is not a good show to binge. I think like half the reason I don't really like part 4 is because I binged it instead of just watching it in bursts. First of all, it's part 3 and for sure is definitely better as a manga than as an anime. But if you are gonna watch the anime, and I think there is reason to do so, just because like. The voices, the Japanese voices are fun and cool and good, and Takahiro Kiyasu is still an epic dio. But if you are gonna do that, do not binge it. Just like watch one arc per day. Like watch one fight per day, basically. And I think that's the optimal JoJo experience.
Yeah, probably, honestly. Let's talk about characters for a little bit here, just because I would like to kind of dive into our main cast of cardboard cutouts and our villain who is a shadow of his former self. Let's talk who is in this show. We have Jotaro Kujo, who is our main JoJo. We have Kakyoin, who is literally a cardboard cutout that I forget about 9 times of the time. We have Joseph Joestar, who ends up being as charming as he was in his previous series when he's actually allowed to do something. which is pretty few and far between. He's usually just shouting, "Oh no," or "Oh shit," or something along those lines. We have Polnareff, who's the closest thing we get to an actual character arc in this series. He's got a couple of moments that are pretty solid. They're nothing special, pretty cliched, but like, I think at this point I'll take anything from any character to do something worthwhile. So Polnareff is fine. He does have the worst episode in the series, however. We have...
He can't even remember his name.
I totally forgot about him. Like, people just disappear. We have Avdol, who comes in, doesn't do anything, dies, comes back like 10 episodes later, hangs around for 10 episodes, and then dies again. So we'll talk about him in more detail. I also want to talk about Kakyoin in more detail, weirdly enough. He's whatever. And we have Dio, who's the main villain, and he is just like, remember how charming and cool Dio was in the first two? This time we're just going to play light lip service to that. And like, actually he wasn't in the second one, I apologize. But he was really charming and clever in the first one. And in this one, he just kind of like, you know how he was charming in the first one? Well, there's a bunch of women around him, drain of blood. That shows he's charming, right? And like, people follow him. That shows he's charming, right? But like, it's just such light lip service. That just references it more than actually gives us any sort of showing of him being cool and clever, that it's really just... I don't care about Dio in this one. He doesn't feel like Dio to me. He just feels like some villain at the end of the road. He could be fucking Bowser for all I care.
I got a bit of a different take on Dio this time, because it is true, he's definitely like the final boss of an RPG, and that's sort of the feeling that we get. But like, I think part of the problem is that, as we kind of talked about this in the Phantom Blood episode, and that like sort of the core development is Dio in that we see him grow from being kind of this like resentful little brat into like an evil overlord. So I think part of the problem is that like he's kind of the same as he was at the end of part one, like still pretty evil, but a little bit more mellow, has like some respect and like caution for his enemies now. So I think the problem is just that like Dio's just kind of done, you know, like his arc is complete as a villain, and he could have
so like he's just a shadow. Like, he's not what he was in the first one.
I don't know. I still like him. I think his voice is great. I like his time stopping shenanigans. I don't know.
I mean, that's fine. I'm not here to like rob that of you. I'm just saying what I got from it, which was absolutely nothing.
And that is also not an uncommon opinion. Yes. So, but continue.
Let's. I want to actually, just because as I'm pretty sure I've covered everything I want to say with Dio, because I don't have much I really want to talk about with Dio. I don't care about Dio in this one. I really want to talk about Kakyoin for a minute here. Which, he's a fucking cardboard cutout literally the entire time. And then when they're finally fighting Dio, they're like, oh shit, we haven't characterized this guy at all. Quick, drop 5 minutes of backstory on him so we can kill him immediately. And that's exactly what they do. He is nothing almost the entire time. They're like, shit, we know nothing about him at all. Here is some sad thing about him being alone, but now he has friends. Oh, and he's dead. That's it. That's Kakyoin's character.
Group dynamics are a difficult thing to make work in this kind of series. Anyone who can do it well is a hero, because so here's the problem with the Crusaders, is that if you look at them as each one filling like a sort of role. So for the characters who have like the clearer characterizations, Jotaro, Polnareff, and Joseph. Already, like, Joseph's kind of clowny, and he's kind of clever. And Jotaro is stoic and kind of clever. Whereas Polnareff is dumb and clowny. So already there's a lot of overlap between like your character roles there. But then you also have not one but two characters who are also supposed to be kind of the calm, collected, like analytical guy. In theory, that's who Kakyoin is supposed to be.
When you said two, I already forgot about Abdul again.
Well, I think Abdul's more memorable than Kakyoin, actually, because at least he has a purpose and, like...
He is, but he's dead for most of the series.
So is Kakyoin, basically.
Correct. Look, the only reason I remember Kakyoin is because I cackled when he fucking got his characterization and then just died.
It is
the only
quite
reason
funny.
I remember him.
And so this is the problem in that, like, one of the things I like about this part, as opposed to like part 4, for example, is that in part 4 the side cast is a lot more distinct. Like the group, ironically, it's the protagonist who ends up being a lot more waffly in that one. But here, what we end up seeing is that for one half of the story, Abdul is out of the picture, and for the other half of the story, Kakyoin is out of the picture. And so the only time we ever get them, like, injured or dead or in peril is because they both serve the same role that Jotaro is already serving, and he clearly can't balance, like, a 5-man group for characterizing.
Well, until they add the dog, and then suddenly he has 5 people at all times.
But even the dog is just, like, off, like, taking a shit somewhere half the time. Like,
yes.
Like, I think he's only involved in, like, 3 fights. Like, his introduction, when he dies, and then the bird. And so I gotta say, this fucking dog, Iggy, Hiroga Araki has some sort of talent, because I think this is literally the only dog in fiction that I hate, and I love dogs.
Fuck everything about this dog. Fuck everything about this dog. He's got a terrible human face, and I hate it, and the voice actor is clearly just a human going like, bark, bark, and it's terrible. I hate it all. And I, too, love dogs. Fuck this dog.
So...
That said, I didn't need to see him get kicked to death. That was a little uncomfortable.
There was a lot of dog death in this one. Like, when I say this is the most JoJo, in that sense too, because that's a pretty famous JoJo thing. I think part 2 is the only one where a dog doesn't die, and they actually go out of their way to show cars sparing a dog.
Oh, good. I can't wait for the rest then.
But as far as the characters, so you have, I think it's good as far as the makeup of the party. I think that having Joseph around still was a good idea, not just because he's the best, but because he does make that contrast more explicit with his grandson, who I can see this dynamic working better in a show that was more about the plot, like maybe what the original idea was, and less about the memes. But I like how Jotaro he's another step in, like, the Joestar bloodline, distinct very much from Jonathan as being just like a complete thug, like treats his family like shit, really like violent, and all that sort of stuff, while still inheriting kind of that like strategizing like mind, but in practice that and then again, like Joseph already was a bit more of a loose cannon compared to Jonathan, but he was a lot more affable. He was a lot more of like an extroverted, like social person. So I like the theory of that contrast, especially at the end. I think it's a big misfire that like this is a story that's theoretically about like lineage, and we get kind of that moment where Jotaro's kind of on his own and has to fight Dio without Joseph. I think that could have been a much better moment, especially if they just let Joseph stay dead. I
cannot believe that they gave Joseph Dio's blood. That felt like it was just setting up for like a sequel in some way.
But it wasn't. And Joseph doesn't do anything in part 4 either. So great. Yeah. So I don't know. Like I like what what he's going for with Jotaro, and I like some of his some of his like cool collected moments. I like when he does the cigarette trick on the boat. But overall, just because like at this point in his career arc, he's not great at characters already, and the fact that like you can't really have any growth means he just ends up being the stoic guy, which is a big problem when there are two other characters who are also just the stoic guy, but we can't have three of them. Two of them is already too many, so let's kill off the stoic guy. But wait, people like the stoic guy, so let's bring him back. Well, I got this other stoic guy now. What are we going to do? Oh, let's blind him and put him in the hospital. So really, and then let's kill both of them.
And then his character trait is now that he has glasses.
Yeah, they're pretty sick glasses, to be fair. Although, I will say that if they had kept him dead, I think that killing off Avdol where he was in the original part, I think that would have been a good move. Because I think that would have made, like, the Monster of the Week formula a little bit more tense. Like, with this idea that maybe we could kill characters. Because Avdol, he would have served his purpose. He knew a lot about stands. He's the one who's, like, kind of into the whole India thing. Like, he's clearly a little bit more worldly than everyone else. And so you get that he's kind of wise, but he's not that important, but he's important enough so he can kind of scold Polnareff, get killed, and then, act as sort of the catalyst for his own character growth, and also maybe up the stakes and give you more time to focus on the other characters. But then they bring him back.
But lol, JK, he not dead.
Yeah, and then Polnareff has to go through the same arc again when he dies for real about, like, being selfless or whatever. And
thankfully that arc takes place over the course of, like, 30 seconds.
Yes, but it's really redundant, especially because Iggy dies in that moment too, which is also meant to inspire the same things. Like, people just keep getting killed in front of Polnareff so he can be less of a clown, and it never sticks.
Especially because, like, then they give him the fucking cloud in front of him, and how can you expect them to be less of a clown when you see Iggy riding fucking Avdol's back and just looking ridiculous?
Yeah, the spirits, I'm really not happy that they went with that, because that continues into part 4. Like, there are more, I guess, spoilers for part 4, but this is vague enough that I don't care. There are more explicit, like, ghosts in part 4, which made me unhappy, because, yeah, no, I'm serious! Several of them, too! And so...
Oh my god.
And, like, I get it, because stands are more, like, spiritual. They're basically superpower souls. But, I don't know. Like, I feel like there's just such a clear divide between, like, the tone and the feeling of part 1 and 2 versus parts 3, 4, 5, and 6. Because when people died in part 1 and 2, even in part 2, which again was a total, like, meme show, like, even then, when, like, Caesar dies, for example, like, it's over the top and melodramatic, but we never get that moment of, like, seeing his ghost. Like, you get the feeling that...
instead we get a cross in which he's crushed under.
We do, but it's still like he's... I don't know. There's something about seeing someone's ghost that puts it over the line for me. 'Cause...
I mean, you're not wrong. I'm just, defending part 2, part 3, I guess? I don't know. I don't really know what I was going with there. I was just kind of saying Caesar's death is also very over the top.
It's definitely over the top, but there's still that finality of, like, him being
also,
fucking
Caesar
dead.
was an actual character that we liked and wanted to see more of.
That's also true.
I'm just saying.
Here's a better example from, like, part 1. Because, part 2 is a total meme show. But part 1, when Jonathan dies, it's a real, like, serious ass moment. It's like the best episode of the whole season when he fucking dies. So the fact that we get explicit ghosts from here on out, I don't know. I don't like ghosts in stories, generally speaking. I feel like when you're dead, you should be fucking dead unless you're coming back through Revolver Ocelot's arm.
Or you get like the fucking Force Ghost thumbs up at the end type of thing.
No, and so, like, and honestly, it bothered me less with Joseph. I mean, you could have done it without a ghost, but, like, it still, at least then, it was in the context of, like, this is a passing of the torch moment. Like, Jotaro, you gotta keep your cool, which feels pretty hollow, because that's, like, Jotaro's most defining character trait. It's not like he's
the fact that he doesn't is insane to me. Honest to God, I thought he was about to be like, haha, I'm just kidding. I'm not really mad. I just wanted you to think I was. And when he doesn't, I'm like, okay, that was strange. That felt very out of character.
Yeah, and so let's talk about this, because I think that this is the crux of Jotaro's character that's present and is like the last sort of bit of like family lineage stuff we're going to care about for a while. But the whole idea behind Jotaro is very obviously that he's this cold asshole on the outside, but like who couldn't, who like scoffs at this whole Dio thing at the beginning and like acts like, hanging out with his shitty old grandpa is like such a drag, but ultimately
calls his mom the B word repeatedly.
Calls his mom a bitch a lot, which is does not at all endear you to him. But like, it's obvious that the idea is supposed to be that, like, deep down he cares, and that, like, by going through this adventure with sort of his family, like, he comes to, like, understand that. So I think that it could have been cool, even, like, if that moment was made more explicit, that, like, this is Jotaro, like, finally breaking. Like, he's finally putting down kind of that teenagery facade, and like, you just watch his grandpa die and his mom's about to die, and now like kind of the pain of the Joestar bloodline is all on him, but the moment doesn't really land like that.
He still looks bored.
Yes.
He looks bored the entire time.
Yeah, so that's the idea, and I think that's a good place to take this kind of character, but they just don't. He just doesn't do the work to make it resonate.
I mean, nothing. I keep going back to this. There is no characters in this arc. I hate to say it, but really, Jonathan is charming still, but he is also just, lip service to his former self. Same thing with Dio. There's no arc for anyone except for Polnareff, and like, I'm still hard pressed to really care about Polnareff. He's fine, but also just he's fine. I don't know. I can't be asked to care about any of these people, good guys or bad guys. You want to talk about? Wait, can I talk about something I liked really quick?
Yeah, do it.
Let's talk about fucking Darby the Gambler. Like, that was a great episode because it was such a throwback to like Joseph's part, where it's all about thinking like 3 steps ahead of your opponent and explaining what's happening and like, haha, you lost because of this. And it was all more about mind games. And this show shines when it's mind games and not mind games that culminate in, I don't know, I backed myself into a corner, let's just write my way out of it. Like, this felt like a genuinely interesting way of being back in what it was and when it was good.
The thing about the poker part too is that like all the games that they play have clear rules, or like are real games that we can understand and follow, and it's like easy to see like what actions the characters are taking, and the reveals are all like well thought out and explained. So it makes those ultimate like gotchas more satisfying, especially because, and going back into like that legacy shit that I keep harping up on, I also like about this episode that like you get the master of deception Joseph Joestar, who looks like he's got it under control, like get outsmarted, and then it's down to like his grandson to like try and succeed where he failed, even though like we've seen that he's clever, but maybe not as clever as his grandfather. So like this whole episode, I mean, it really works. This is definitely the highlight of the season for sure.
And then his brother's stupid. I don't know. I don't really have anything else to say about his brother. I just didn't like the Darby the Younger. It was dumb. It was fine.
I will say that Darby the Younger gave us, "Oh, that's a baseball!" and I laugh a lot every time. And I mean, really, so that's why I'm still a bit of a sucker for part 3. Is that when you accept that it's not about characters, when you accept that Jotaro only exists to punch people and look cool, and you accept that Joseph's only there to make memes, and you're there only for the memes, you know what? I had a good time with the memes. I like the whole road trip like aesthetic. I like them being wacky. It's a downgrade from part 2 in every way for sure. But I think, especially in the manga, especially when you do take it as like you're just gonna sit down and like watch a little bit of JoJo every week, it's a lot easier to see the appeal than when you binge it and like hope to have real characters that aren't just like 2-dimensional at best, you know?
I mean, especially because I feel like binging is when all the problems with the stands really come to the forefront, when you start to recognize, oh, this rule that was established last episode just doesn't fucking matter anymore. When you take it, if there's a week in between fights where, it's a part 1, part 2, you take a week and then watch the next set, it feels a lot more like you might forget that, hey, this character can suddenly do this type of thing, or it feels more removed, like something has changed in between it. But like when you're like, all right, I'm going to finish up this and then move on to the next one, and wait, why can they all walk on this ship now? Even though it's a stand? How does that work? Don't worry about it? Okay, I'm going to worry about it anyway because I am 8 episodes in and I still have no idea what the fuck is happening.
Yeah, and so, I mean, those problems don't all, like, go away, of course. They are mitigated, and the other thing, too, about the transition is that this is a pretty, well-known example amongst JoJo fans, but take The Sun, for instance. Like, just a total meme episode, just complete stupidity. Like, the whole point is that it's dumb. And I love The Sun. I think it's great for how fucking stupid it is. But a lot of people think it's one of the worst episodes. And especially in the anime, where you have to sit down and watch a full 30 minutes of The Sun. It's incredibly tiresome. Whereas in the manga, I can
believe you mean Tire Sun.
What?
I believe you mean Tire Sun.
Get the fuck out of here. In the
Sorry,
manga,
I needed my dad joke for the episode.
You had to fit it in there.
I got a quota to make here, all right?
gotta please all the dads in our audience.
Hi, Dad.
But in the manga, it's like 30 minutes versus 5 minutes. Like, you read The Sun, they're in their situation, like, oh, fuck, it's hot, we gotta hide under this, how are we ever gonna beat this awe-inspiring sand? And then they all crack up, and a stupid mirror thing happens, and they throw a rock at him, and he dies, and it takes you, like, 5 minutes to read. And so it's just a quick gag that plays so much better in, like, a newspaper comic, as opposed to an episode of a fucking TV show.
I mean, that too is the other thing, and we haven't really touched on that as much, I don't think. I mean, you covered a lot of it in your like early on discussion when you're kind of talking about the how these comics are made, but like it is just moments are just so arduous because you're like, I know how this fight's going to end, just wrap it up. Especially because when it's 24 episodes of Monster of the Week, you've got your cast set up, none of them are going to die. Let's just get it over with. I don't need to watch 20 minutes of setup for them to go Ora, and it's over. It's done. That's it. We're moving on. I don't need that. I can just get it in 5 minutes. I can go read the synopsis of it and be like, oh, okay, moving on. I don't know. The whole I'm so disenchanted with this part. It's just it has its moments, but it's not worth it to watch 48 fucking episodes of part 3.
Now, all right. I'm gonna offer one last grand thesis for why I still like part 3 better than some of the other parts, and it's this: it's that part 3, because it doesn't have really a plot, because it doesn't really have character development, because it is so specifically just about like wacky locales and wacky powers and memes, I am able to accept that for what it is more easily than in later parts where they have a story now, where there is like part 4 in particular is really bad about this. I really dislike part 4 for this reason, but the experience I guess if you're comparing it, like, the series often gets compared and contrasted to Dragon Ball. And particularly in the anime adaptation of Dragon Ball, one of the things that makes the non-Kai versions, even a bit of Kai, frustrating is that sometimes, like, something tense and dire will be happening, and then we'll cut to Yamcha doing some bullshit that clearly doesn't matter and makes a stupid joke. And
standard Yamcha shit, you know.
Yeah, we'll cut to the driving episode of Goku and Piccolo learning how to drive. And so that's frustrating when, like, you're actually maybe interested in what's going on. And so part 4 for me is just like 15 episodes of Yamcha doing dumb bullshit. Then they introduce, like, this really interesting character with this really interesting plot. And then just when you think it's going to be about that from now on, it's going to have a real plot, we go back to another, like, 10 episodes of Yamcha doing dumb bullshit. Whereas every episode of part 3 is the driving episode. And so there is no plot for me to distract from. You want to bring me the memes? Bring me the memes. I'll absorb them. I'll watch the memes, and thank you for not even pretending that this is a serious story anymore, because it's a lot easier to swallow for me personally that way.
But flip side, we also get fucking strength. We get the Wheel of Fortune, which, honest to God, Wheel of Fortune is just such a non-thing for me. Who fucking cares?
I legit forgot about the fucking car until I got to it.
Yeah, it's whatever. But most importantly, this fucking format brings us Sets Alessi, which is just the worst 40 minutes I have ever subjected myself to. It is so miserable, and I will not forgive part 3 for that.
So the worst thing about Sets Alessi, for the aside from the obvious,
is fucking everything.
But the absolute worst thing among these things is that he's got the power to turn people into children. Which, fine, that's a power. Make people younger, which he then uses to make Polnareff into a child, and we see his little Polnareff penis. And then
for like 30 minutes.
Yes. And then he gets scrubbed down by this lady who he like blows on her tits. And then she gets turned into a fetus by this man with pedophile overtones.
Overtones isn't a strong enough word.
That is definitely an understatement. But I'm going off the cuff here. So we have this pedophilic axe murderer turning Polnareff into a child, and then this lady into a fetus. And then Jotaro shows up, and he gets turned into a kid too, and it looks like all is lost. And now, who do we have on hand in the cast but an extremely old man who would benefit from growing younger? And not only would he benefit from growing younger, but we've seen him as a young man before, as an incredibly fun, charismatic young man. And so this would be the perfect opportunity, if we're here for the memes, if we're here for the fan service, this would be a perfect opportunity to get old Joseph young again and have him do his part 2 shenanigans and for the crowd to go wild. Instead, we get Jotaro beating him up as a 7-year-old, which not only is an unsatisfying conclusion and not as good as the alternative, but directly goes against, like, the one thing that we know about his character, which is that he used to be a sweet kid. It just contradicts that from the beginning. So, yeah, rip. Terrible episode.
It also, and this is important, features Polnareff pooping on a man.
So much poop in this. That's actually the thing I dislike most about this part, is that, like, before and after, like, JoJo is gross, but gross in, like, a gory, like, slimy horror way. There's so much pooping and farting in this, and I don't understand it. It's like, here he awakened to something dark and terrible between part 2 and this.
And the worst part, too, is that, like, everything gross and gory is censored on the releases that you try and watch. Like, it's all darkened out, so, like, you don't get any of the good gore that you got in the previous ones. Instead, you just get the poo.
That's a good point, actually. Yes, for that reason alone, read the manga, and that, so even, like, there's still some good-ass gore. Like, if you're a fan of some gore, like, honestly, that might, like, it makes it so much better to just get, like, a nice, disgusting panel of some dude's, like, face getting ripped off, uncensored. It's great. Yeah, that is a good point. Like, the Crunchyroll subs, crazy that they still don't have the uncensored version up, and it's been, like, 4 years since this part came out.
yeah, it was. I admittedly kind of liked the censoring at some points, specifically with JoJo smoking. I thought that looked kind of cool like that because it gave it kind of like a dark, edgy vibe. But otherwise, it was just kind of like, all right, whatever. Just fucking not. You show me poop all over the place, but you won't give me a good gore shot. All right, cool.
You know, apparently the 11-year-old girl's, like, ass wasn't worth censoring, but God forbid, like, some dude get his fucking face ripped off.
Or, you know, pulling her up's penis for 40 fucking minutes.
That, I will say, that's definitely a cultural thing, and that, like, nudity in children in anime is not, like, nobody would bat an eye at that.
I mean, I know, but, like, I was trying to watch this at work. All right?
Well, actually, let me tell a similar story, not about part 3, but about part 2. In that, so I teach at a university, and I have to have office hours, which suck. I don't want to be there. So I have to find ways to kill the time. So early on in my illustrious career, I decided, like, oh, I can catch up on some anime. Like, I've been watching this action show called JoJo. Like, sure, anime's weird and perverted, but, like, nothing can possibly go wrong here. So I open up the episode of JoJo that I happen to be on, which is the one where in the first 5 minutes, Joseph spies on his mom in the bath. And I have people in my office with me, so I immediately, like, close the laptop suspiciously like I was looking at porn or something, and I'm like, no, don't turn around, I just don't open my laptop until I go home.
Yeah, anime's weird, man. Anime should be illegal.
No, I love it.
It should all be illegal. Let's just ban it. Fuck it.
No, I'll cry forever if I don't get my daily dose of, oh, that's a baseball.
Good fucking lord. All right. Do we want to talk about anything else with this? I mean, we can talk about, you know what? Absol's fucking weird. They just bring him back and kill him repeatedly. That's really all I gotta say about Abdul. Like, it's so lazy.
Here's some trivia. Apparently, so saith the internet, after Abdul got killed the first time, he was planning on replacing him with a different person. Do you want to know who he was going to replace him with?
Oh, okay. I'm going to go with Whole Horse.
Indeed, it was going to be Whole Horse, which you can see, like, when you know this, or like, again, if this is true. I can't remember, like, the source on this. Might just be hearsay. But, if you look at that chapter Justice, you can see that, like, they try to, like, portray Whole Horse as a more sympathetic character and even set up for, like, him to join the crew. And then at his last second, he's like, psych, I'm still evil, bye, because he changed his mind. But, like, that would have been even worse because Abdul is dead because Whole Horse killed him. Why would they just let Whole Horse's murderer onto the team?
Because Whole Horse is a more interesting character.
That's true, but then we would have 3 clowns, and 2 is already too many.
I guess. I don't know, man. I just needed something more to happen somewhere.
Well, we did it, guys. We talked about part 3. You've broken Sean. Thank you.
Part 4 is coming sometime next year. We're booked through February, or through January as to what we're doing, so expect part 4, I don't know, maybe March or May or something. We'll see what happens.
Oh, I can't wait to make you get But when we get to part 7, it'll be actually good.
Great. That's only 4 parts away.
Part 6 is good too.
Okay. I mean, still, I'm exhausted already, and I'm just. As long as there's not another monkey with a ship, I'm fine. I'll be all right.
Ooh, I mean, JoJo has many things in store for you, friend.
I've been Sean McKinda. Find me on Twitter if you want. I don't know. It's at Sean_McKinda. My website's fucking isortof.com. Go there. I stream.
And I'm Jackson Keller. You can find me over on Twitter at Jackson J. Keller, where normally I'm not. But if you guys want to talk shop, you guys want to talk JoJo, I'll be there for you. I've actually, as someone who has talked to enough JoJo fans, I recognize that I actually dropped some pretty spicy JoJo takes on this episode. So maybe we can fight about them.
If you want to follow the podcast, do so at BADH_cast. We just kind of tweet about updates and stuff like that. Or if you want to let us know that, hey, Sean, your opinions are totally wrong. JoJo Part 3 is great and you're just an idiot. You can do that there, I guess. I mean, you should probably just at me instead. If, my friends, you are listening to this on Thursday, November 29th, the day that it comes out, please tune into my stream over at twitch.tv/helpless_Skippy. That night, we're going live at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and that's right, I said we, because we're going to have Jackson on for a spectacular of just disastrous proportions.
Hell yeah. I mean, should we say, just so if there are people listening to this on Thursday, they can be like, oh shit, I gotta go do this right now.
Well, I mean, I have announced that we will be playing Sonic 06 that Thursday night. I have a sealed copy of the game, untouched by human hands. The disc popped out in shipping, so I'm a little concerned about that. But, like, it's a glitchy fucking mess anyway. We won't know if it's the disc's fault or not.
I was gonna... Actually, I've probably played and seen enough people playing Sonic 06 enough that I probably will be able to tell you which glitches are normal and which ones are not.
Cool. This is gonna be a nightmare. So yeah, that's gonna be my birthday stream. So come by and,
Wish your boy a happy birthday.
Yeah, let's go with that, and follow the Twitch stream. That's if you want to give me a present, that's all you gotta do. Just follow my Twitch stream. That's great for me. So do that. Other than that, as always, shout out to Lords of the Highway for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide Alternate Take off the album High Octane Low Expectations. Go check them out. They're a great band on Spotify. All that good stuff. Also, thanks to 25usersite.com for hosting us. I don't know why you're gonna put this episode up there, but hey, it's in your RSS feeds, so good luck explaining to your usual readers why you have a JoJo episode up. It's gonna be a weird one for you.
I mean, I'm assuming that most of their regular audience doesn't know what the fuck JoJo is, so hopefully they'll just ignore it like they should.
Okay, I mean that's fair. I mean, let's be honest. Next week is the start of December, and we're gonna be doing something a little bit interesting in December, in that we're gonna be talking about a lot of Spider-Man movies. So next week we're going to be talking about Raimi's Spider-Man 1 and 2. If you want to go back and reacquaint yourself with those, they're supposed to be really good, and I have not seen them in 15 years, so I'm very excited.
Yeah, I really push for the Spider-Man thing, just because Spider-Man 2 in particular is well regarded as a Dark Knight tier, classic of the superhero genre that I have not watched since I was very young, and have only really had interactions with shitty Spider-Man movies, so I kind of want to go back and watch them because I like Spider-Man. So and Into the Spider-Verse was a good reason as any to finally get this off of our backlog. So fuck you, we're talking about Spider-Man all of December.
Basically, yeah. So get ready for that, and bye.
Don't you go